Namaskar students. Today we will be going into lecture number 13 in our English series, and this lecture will be on an issue which wherein globalization, a major issue that has come up today in today's international relations, is the issue of poverty. As most of you know, the World Bank has said that this has been a major issue, that despite so many years of economic growth and others, we have not been able to remove poverty, hunger. And how do we relate this to development? Because we'll also be doing a lecture on human security, where I'll deal with this whole Human Development Initiative done by the United Nations Development Program, that is UNDP. Right? But today we will talk only about poverty and hunger, and how do we relate it to development, especially in the field of international relations. Right? So today the lecture will cover this area. Now, when we talk about poverty, usually the critique comes from the capitalist system, that many countries, even during the Cold War, half the world followed capitalism. So many people say that one of the negatives of capitalism has been inequality and the growing gap between the rich and the poor. So greater prominence of the global economy has been on issues of political, economic, and social. Many ideas and issues remain contested, meaning how do you deal with poverty? What is the best way to remove hunger? Is poverty a structural characteristic of the current capitalist world order? We live in a world of plenty, while so many remain hungry. Why? Is it wise to think of development as a singular economic project? These are some of the issues that we will try to deal with in this lecture. First is, what is the relationship between poverty and social unrest? This has been of late recognized. You see all over the world, including in countries like America, at the smallest thing, there are huge social unrest, violence, burning down. Take, for example, you had Floyd. Now you have Blake issue, both of them history sheeters, but still you have a lot of anger coming out from a section or a fringe of society. And in a country like America, which is thought to be one of the richest countries in the world, there's such huge social unrest. So is there a gap? Is there a huge inequality? Now world order is being described as globalized or globalization. Many people say globalization enriches as well as impoverishes people, meaning it makes more poor or a new poor, and there are a rich as well, depending on the skills each. Then, recognizing the rich-poor duality of globalization, the United Nations, as most of you, created what is called the Millennium Development Goals. The first goal of this Millennium Development was the eradication of poverty and hunger, with a target of halving the population or proportion of people living on less than $1.25 by 2015. 2015 is already over, we are 2020. $1.25 means more or less, let's say about 70 to $1.25 means about 90 rupees per day. Let's say even 100 rupees per day. Now, what are the values of today's world order, especially economic? Globalized, it's neoliberal world order. One is free market. Second is individualism. Third is consumerism. And fourth is monetization. These are the main characteristics of this order. Now, poverty. In today's globalized world order, ideas of a global free market and monetization of all goods and services act as a central guide for the contemporary economic and social thought, meaning everybody sells and they get money or currency through it. The failure to gain waged labor in order to sufficient money to provide the basic needs is defined as poverty. Those who provide for themselves have no need for cash transactions or wage labor and act cooperatively like hunter-gatherer groups do not fit into this orthodox views. For example, in Andaman Nicobar or several tribes in Africa as well as in many parts of the world. The alleviation of poverty is dependent on development, defined as economic growth and measured with a monetary value. Many critics reject this view. Now, what do the critics tell us? The critics tell us that poverty is not defined as a lack of voice or weakened about social norms, decreased opportunities in community festivals, vulnerability to exploitation, and power and threats to cultural identity and above all material wealth. So you have an alternative group telling you it's not just monetization. It is not just wage labor. It is beyond that. They say dependence on an unpredictable market or even an uncertain market or an unreliable government offering a free market approach to development does not seem attractive. Many of them would go with Susan Strange. Here, most of you should read her book called Casino Capitalism. She says capitalism is somebody else plays the game for you and all your money is gone over one night. So it is like casino where you go and literally, throw your money off in a casino. She says developed countries also have poverty as an issue. For example, United States of America, Europe and others, that affects and defines the less developed integration into the global economy. Many people think that poverty is something that we should have solved because it is not an issue that we don't have enough food. It is just that despite we are having too much food, we are not able to feed everybody. There is some problem in the way we are implementing things, or there's some problem in distribution. A critical alternative view of poverty places more emphasis on access to community resources, community ties, and spiritual and cultural values. Now the second issue, hunger. Food and Agricultural Organization defines hunger through an input-output model, where food caloric input is sufficient to maintain body weight and a level of physical activity output consistent with long-term health. Number two, although chronic hunger affects over 800 million people globally, food shortage is not a central cause. 3. The greatest increase is expected in just a few countries, Nigeria, India and Uganda, in both population rise. And as most of you know, there are two main schools of thought that connects population to food production and others. The orthodox nature-focused approach is also called the Malthusian approach, which identifies the problem largely as one of population. And the second is what is called the entitlement society-focused approach, which sees the problem more in terms of distribution. Now, the orthodox nature-focused was first mapped by Thomas Robert Malthus in his essay on the principle of population in 1798. And he focuses on the relationship between human population growth and food supply. He says, population grows at a geometric rate and food production grows only at an arithmetic rate. So what happens if population grows, keeps on growing or multiplying, then there is going to be shortage and this would bring disaster. He places great stress on that human overpopulation is the cause of the problem and he seeks ways to reduce the fertility of the human race. For example, in India also, we are trying ways and means to bring it. In a democratic country, it is very difficult, whereas China, being a Marxist authoritarian dictatorship, it has been able to control its population, whereas in India, everybody says, my God says that you cannot do this, that. Every type of reason is given. That part of the breed faster, and then the rest. Especially the poor of the underdeveloped or the developing world. Now, the orthodox nature focused. The supporters of this approach argued that there is a natural limits to population, meaning the earth has a particular carrying capacity and beyond that it cannot carry. So it basically means that minute we cross that, there is going to be disaster. Now, what is the second approach? The second approach, if you see, are the critics of the orthodox approach. They say the orthodox approach is too simplistic. There is no account of the socio-economic context in which the hungry must live their lives. They basically see it in the unequal distribution of wealth, which is characteristic of global capitalism. There is more than enough food in the world to feed everyone, although 815 million people go hungry every day. So the entitlement society focused approach looks upon the cause of hunger. They say it is found in inequalities that are functionally component to capitalism. Capitalism as a socio-economic order brings an immense inequality. Reform of the structural conditions are very necessary, they say, if you want to remove poverty and hunger. Paradoxically, that the majority of the world's people live in less developed countries, which produce much of the world's food, while those who consume most of it are located in the wealthy developed countries. And here, if you see, one of the persons of this enlightenment approach is our own economist, Amartya Sen. A well-known alternative approach to hunger and poverty is his book called Poverty and Famines, an essay on entitlement and deprivation. Noting that, see, he studied the Bengal famine, and he says there was no difference in food production when there was no famine or when there was famine. So he says famine was basically a human created situation, or that created by the British at that time. So basically he says it is that entitlement to food, even when food is available. Now, globalization and hunger. Globalization means that events occurring in one part of the world can affect and are affected by events occurring in other or distant parts of the world. We remain unaware of our role in the process and its ramifications. So David Goodman and Michael Redcliffe did precisely this in their book, Refashioning Nature, Food Ecology and Culture. Argue we are witnessing an increasingly global organization of food production and access to food, with transnational corporations playing a major role. The US has been an important actor in the development and expansion of this food regime. See, the global organization of food production has turned the South into a world farm to satisfy consumers in developed regions at the expense of scarcity and permanent hunger in less developed regions. Meat increased demand from India and China has meant 1/3 of the world's grain production is used to fatten animals, further reducing the supply of grains on which the poor depend. There is a shift in land use from food production to crops for the biofuel industry. Food insecurity due to free market principles, especially the 2009 World Summit on Food Security, but very little action in reality was taken from whatever suggestions were given at this summit. Now they say globalization and hunger. In recent decades, global food production has burgeoned, but paradoxically, hunger and malnutrition remain widespread, and the numbers are rising once again. Most of you would have been seeing pictures of Yemen, where there's a civil war going on. You have young children who are starved. It's so inhuman, but still we are doing nothing about it. Access and entitlement of hunger focuses on the lack of access or entitlement are affected by factors such as North-South global divide, particular national policies, rural-urban divide, class, gender, and globalization. Globalization can simultaneously contribute to increased food production and to increased hunger. This is extremely paradoxical, but many people have been telling us that this is what has been happening. Now, development. What is development? There is no universally accepted definition. All conceptions of development necessarily reflect a particular set of social and political principles, norms, and values. All conceptions of development are constructed within an ideological framework. Now, development, what is the orthodox mainstream approach? Post-World War II approach, the central economy is basically what we call the Bretton Woods system. It is a liberal international economic order, and the institutional spine are three main organizations: the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank Group, and the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, which has now become the World Trade Organization, or WTO. Their decision-making favors the developed Western states. Embedded liberalism is what this approach is defined by, meaning pursuit of free trade, allowing an appropriate role of state interventionism in the market in support of national security and national and global stability. See, during the Cold War rivalry between the US and the USSR, if most of you see, there were two different orders, and the global capitalist order with the Soviet command economy and others, and then you had a third world group of developing countries and the non-aligned group, which had a new international economic order. Developing decolonized countries offer economic support for development. Role of the state as the agent for development suffered a major setback in the 1980s. The developing countries had borrowed heavily in the 1970s in response to the rising oil prices. Most of you know that the first oil shock came in 1973. Suddenly oil prices went up, and as most of us know, the main source of energy is still oil and gas. Second oil crisis worsened this. As a result, the developing countries are unable to repay their spiraling debts. Now, with this came in what is called structural adjustment policies, or SAP. It's many people also call it self-adjudicated poverty or administered poverty. Vigorous policy by the World Bank and IMF throughout the developing world. They work together in an unprecedented fashion to encourage developing countries to pursue. See, when they give you loans or they give you this thing, they also see to it that you follow certain rules and regulations as stipulated by the IMF. That is called structural adjustment policies. Open their borders to foreign investment and adopt a small state culture that sought reductions in spending, especially on welfare schemes, education, health, all this gets affected. Exports are promoted so that these countries could earn foreign exchange necessary to keep up with their debt payments. See, this post-Washington consensus. Post-Cold War, what happens? Neoliberalism becomes even more powerful, especially in the economic. Free market capitalism, but also promotes important political and social values such as freedom of choice and rights of the individual. A major ideological shift heralded and played an important role in accelerating the globalization process. in response to over a billion poor and hungry people, stress pro-growth and poverty reduction based on a continued domestic policy reform and included in trade liberalization and further state withdrawal from economic and social policy. This is very negative for especially poor countries. So what do you get? You get a minimalist state. What is a minimalist state? Deregulation of businesses, non-interventionist policies in social and economic affairs, the privatization of any remaining publicly owned services and industry, a reduction in the abolition of public welfare programs. And you also have minimum taxation, particularly on businesses, international promotion and support for the free movement of capital, enhanced role for the market. Now, what is this neoliberal economic order? Developing countries have made significant gains, they say, GDP per capita and industrialization. Second, they say 1990 to 2015, the UN claimed that the proportion of people living on less than $1.25 a day declined from nearly half of those in the less developed world to 14%, 1.9 billion to 836 million globally. In both China and India, development, poverty and hunger still exists. Now, what is the alternate approaches? Concerns are basically on the issue of entitlement, that is on the issue of distribution, expressed in the language of human rights. Poverty is the absence of an environment conducive to the human being, broadly conceived in spiritual, social, and community terms. The language of opposition is changing to incorporate matters of democracy, such as political empowerment, participation, meaningful self-determination for the majority, protection of the commons, the preservation of culture, and an emphasis on a pro-poor growth. What now? Is there an alternative? Many people say yes. 1975, the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation publication, it advanced what is called the alternative conception. It was need-oriented and endogenous, meaning coming from within the society, self-reliant in terms of human, natural, and cultural resources, ecologically strong and sound, and based on structural transformation of economy, society, gender, power relations. Now, the issue of inequality. Poverty saw a little change. The minority became richer and the majority remained poor. Discontent, as Robert W. Cox, one of the Marxist theorists, which we'll do in the International Political Economy theorists, basically it mitigated this by saying that this is through temporary relief through aid and poverty reduction schemes. UNDP recognized risks of inequality between 1990s and 2000s. Inequality increased by 9% in the developed countries and 11% in the developing countries. The World Economic Forum Davos annual risk report in 2014 cited severe income disparity as a permanent threat to the global economy. In 2014, the IMF, in its report, questioned the trickle-down, the assumption that wealth created at the top of the social and economic order will over time benefit those at the bottom as a solution to poverty. Now, radical approaches. Poverty is a necessary component of capitalism and the neoliberal order. Many people say unless you don't change this concept, it's not possible. They say in the last 3 decades, the world's 1% richest people are twice as wealthy as the poorest 50%. So such a big disparity is there. remain unclear on what structures of neoliberalism has to be dismantled and replaced that favors the poor. Although social solidarity, care for our planet, and new ethical politics are central ideas, grassroots movements on specific issues have been encouraged, like the Narmada Bachao Andolan or the other 98% and others. Now, resistance, empowerment, and development. Democracy as an instrument for the voice of the poor is at the heart. Grassroots movements are playing an important role in challenging entrenched structures of power in formal democratic societies. In the phase of increasing globalization with erosion of local community control over daily life and the extension of the power of the transnational corporations in the global market, they are protecting what they identify as the immediate source of their threat to their land, rejecting the dominant agenda of private and public spheres and setting an alternative. Now, what is the alternative? Resistance, empowerment, and development. Rather than accept a particular movement, many people say that you need symbols of identity, struggle, and substantive democracy. Arab Spring, or even what type of, you have Black Lives Matter, all these that is coming in. But the question is, are they really only disruptive, or they're able to give you some alternative structures? Values diversity over universality, but most of these movements don't show those values and is based on a different understanding of human rights. We have Occupy movement, we are the 99% and all that. Can the neoliberal order abolish poverty and hunger? There are two views. One, the for view. It says that human freedom is most important. And they say at the core, it is human rights and civil and political rights. Promotes free market enterprise, offers individuals an opportunity to engage unhindered. They say if you give freedom, people will create their creativity, business skill, create wealth for the good of the community. Enlighten self-interest. Eventually, they say you abolish poverty through a trickle-down theory. Wealth is created at the top of the social order, and it is expected to be invested to create jobs and wages. Minimum government and taxation are an expression of human freedom. Success can be shown empirically. Poor and hungry benefit during a depression as well. Like in America, most of them got paid than what pay they got every week. That's why many of them don't want even to go back to work, because they're getting this unemployment thing. So they're happy with the COVID. Can the liberal order abolish poverty? Against. Definition of human freedom is limited. Economic and cultural group rights are missing, such as the essential part of what makes us human. Enterprise and wealth creation require a stable social context. All should benefit through a redistribution of wealth. Rising income inequality and decline in income of working people all point to the failure of trickle-down. The wealth of the rich amasses in sheltered tax havens to avoid taxation. Declining state, social, and welfare provision have damaging effects. Global poverty and hunger have been artificially induced, achieved on external innovation and funding rather than community initiative driven by local culture and knowledge. So now what is the conclusion to our chapter, our whole discussion on poverty, hunger, and development? We saw the two different views. We also discussed the issue. Although the UN claims success in its Millennium Development Goals, doubts are there because poverty and hunger are still there, and many people doubt the accuracy of the statistics. Much of the claimed success can be attributed to the growth of the Chinese and Indian economies during the last decade, while other developing countries show very little improvement. In some parts of the world, social unrest has turned to violent conflict that directly affects levels of poverty and hunger. Currently, 155 million children under the age of 5 are considered stunted, of whom nearly 75% are living in countries affected by conflict like Sudan, Somalia, you have Yemen. Hunger is used as a weapon of war. Reformist pathway, history will reveal whether this pathway bears the seeds of its own destruction by delivering too little, too late to too few people. See, it is extremely important that we at the international law level order have a responsibility to our brethren. This is what the human rights approach tells you, that they are very much like you. So it is very important that we share and redistribute these sources, otherwise we will be ending for a disaster. That is, if you cannot save the many who are poor, even the few who are rich cannot be saved. So on this note we will end, and we will pursue these issues in later lectures in human security, human rights, human development initiatives and all that. Okay, thank you so much.